Hi, this is CJ. Welcome to When the Storm Breaks, a JiKook ABO Enemies to Lovers series full of danger, longing, and forbidden attraction. In a world divided by ancient pacts and wolf-pack hierarchies, Alpha Jungkook of the Jeon clan captures the elusive Black Swan, the alluring and mysterious spy from the rival Park pack. A storm brews over the borderlands as two powerful alphas clash in a battle of dominance, duty, and desire, and discover along the way that the greatest threat might be the pull between the two of them. This is episode 1. A new audiobook episode is released every Saturday. You can find the written version of this and all my stories on my Patreon at patreon.com/cjmoon, and the original video version of this story, as well as dozens more, on my main channel at youtube.com/@cjmoonwrites. All links are also in the description. If you're watching as well as listening, hit the CC button to turn on subtitles. YouTube can auto-translate as well as auto-dub from English into the language of your choice. So make yourself a warm drink and get comfy, because this one will be exciting and emotional. I hope you enjoy your journey.
Chapter 1. The Black Swan. An alpha should never smell like temptation. The report was damp at the edges, like even the parchment wanted to wash its hands of the responsibility of it. The Black Swan, Park Jimin, sighted crossing the East Ridge unaccompanied. Jungkook read the line twice, thumb smudging the ink. Rumor, most likely. The Parks fed those like breadcrumbs to see who followed. This was more than a breadcrumb. A Black Swan sighting was a full-on three-course feast. Tantalizing and irresistible. Across the tent, Yoongi folded his arms. Sure, he was a beta, but no one would dare call Yoongi just anything to his face. Could be bait, he said, blunt as always. He's never careless. Everyone slips eventually, Jungkook protested. Everyone except him. Jungkook said nothing. The brazier cracked softly, throwing a curl of heat across the maps. Outside, the wind was turning, bringing the smell of wet pine. A storm was crawling up the valley, slow and certain, and every instinct in his body told him to wait. But instinct had a poor record in politics, and worse in war. His duty was written in orders, not omens. Jungkook folded the parchment once, then again, and tucked it into his belt. "Riders in 10 minutes, he said. "If it's bait, we'll find who said it." The forest they traveled was older than the border it divided. Mist clung low, curling around hooves and boots alike, and the air carried the damp green smell of moss and hidden things. Jungkook kept to the front, leading his men, eyes on the faint break of light between trees where a ridge path cut east. Every few months, the council wanted proof that the Parks were cheating some treaty clause as a way of getting out of it, and every few months he rode out to deliver it. Nothing ever changed except the names of the dead. None of it had led to war yet, but it was only a matter of time. Jungkook didn't want that war. He'd seen enough border fires smoldering to know how fast they spread when pride caught the wind. But he'd also caught the Parks lying too many times to believe in their innocence now. The treaties were parchment thin, and the wax that sealed them smelled too much like fear. He wasn't a councilman. He wasn't even the highest alpha in the Jeon ranks. Not yet. But command didn't always come from titles. An alpha could lead and still kneel, obey and still burn to defy. He knew his place in the pack's chain, but he also knew when to strain against it. Next to him, Yoongi's horse paced even with his. The beta had the quiet steadiness of someone who'd seen too many campaigns to bother with bravado. Where Jungkook's authority came from instinct and lineage, Yoongi's came from the kind of sense most alphas lacked: sharp, pragmatic, unflappable even when the world burned around him. You keep frowning like that, and the wind will take it as a challenge. Jungkook almost smiled. If Yoongi had been born alpha, he'd have ruled them all, not with scent or teeth, but with sheer, immovable logic. The pack followed his word as easily as they followed Jungkook's scent, and some days that balance was the only reason any of them came home. Let it, Jungkook said. He wasn't angry, not really, just tired of chasing shadows. The Black Swan had gone from myth to legend, an alpha spy who could slip through watchfires and walk away with secrets worth armies. Beautiful, they said, but beauty didn't interest him. Control did. Order. The certainty that his men would come home. And Jungkook had seen enough to know that nothing was certain when the Black Swan was involved, which was why he was so quick to notice the change in the air around him. Something restless prickled under his skin, a low hum that wasn't the weather. The faintest trace of something unidentifiable in the scent of the forest. He told himself it was campfire residue from the night before, but the lie sat uneasily in his chest. The wind shifted again, carrying a whisper of rain. Jungkook breathed deep, steadying the instinct that always rose when another alpha's scent touched the edge of his awareness. No one but another alpha would be able to detect it yet. Yet, under it all, the forest waited, listening. The horses' hooves stomped the soft ground like even they too were distrustful of the shift around them. Jungkook lifted a hand, and his riders fanned out wordlessly behind him, the gesture sharp enough to slice the morning in two. He could feel it under his skin, the wrongness of it all. This wasn't the usual park patrol cadence, not the tidy sweeping signal their scouts sent like heartbeat taps through the trees. The prints in the mud were jagged, rushed, like they were covering tracks only because there were tracks to cover. South lines gone quiet. Yoongi murmured, eyes scanning the ridge. His tone made it sound like an accusation against the weather itself. If the parks are running a decoy. They're not, Jungkook said low. This is something else. The wind turned, tasting of wet leaves, yet with it came a thread of that same scent. Citrus, bright and a little bitter. Under it, he could now pick up something darker. Smoky cedar, the kind that clung to skin and warmed with the body that carried it. Jungkook's jaw flexed. He's here. Yoongi didn't need to ask who he was. The name the Johns whispered like a curse had been muttered around fire pits for months now. The Black Swan. Part Jimin. Spy. Trickster. Pretty as sin and twice as dangerous. He slipped through nets and treaties with the same careless grace he danced through ballads, leaving behind bad information and worse ideas. Some said he'd once stolen whole troop plans with a smile and a song. Jungkook didn't believe in magic, but he did believe in people who used belief as a weapon. Jungkook had seen him more than once, across negotiation tables layered with maps and false smiles. Never at the center, always just behind the park envoy, where power hid in plain sight. The black feather insignia stitched over his chest had glinted like a provocation, taunting the Jeon delegation with every elegant breath. They'd all known who he was, even if the parks never named him. The spy, the songbird, the shadow behind the throne, the one they could never quite prove existed. Jungkook hadn't needed another glimpse to remember him. His scent had lingered long after the treaties were signed. Cedar and citrus, smoke and nerve, a ghost on his skin, daring him to forget. A startled cry snapped the hush. They found the ambush where the old streambed bent. 3 mercenaries in patchwork armor pressing a figure to his knees. Rope cut hard into pale wrists. A knife pressed to a throat that didn't tremble. The prisoner's head was bowed, dark hair wet against his cheeks, but the line of him was all defiance. Back straight, chin tipped, fury contained by thinnest of leashes. Jungkook knew it was him immediately. Move and I open him, the knife man snarled. The accent was borderless, Cell's word, loyalty to coin and no other gods. You already made your first mistake, Jungkook answered, calmly, as cool as ice over deep water. He let the Jeon riders settle in a half-ring around him, bows notched, blades bright. You thought you'd walk through the Jeon border and name prices. We're not selling to you, pretty boy. The man yanked his captive higher, so the full sight of him cut the clearing like unsheathed steel. Parts will pay twice whatever you offer, especially for their little. His next word drowned under Yoongi's arrow thudding through his shoulder. The knife fell. The mercenaries bolted for the bracken as the Jeon wolves loosed arrows like rain around them. The clearing erupted in noise, metal on wood, wet grunts, the smack of bodies as they collapsed in the mud. Jungkook ignored all and moved straight for the kneeling man. The air changed between them, the way heat does before a strike of lightning. Cedar and sandalwood collided, one sharp with smoke and citrus, the other deep with amber and restraint. It shouldn't have worked, that mix of storm and stillness, but the forest felt it first, a shift in balance, two alphas circling the same gravity. Up close, the legends of his beauty were insultingly accurate. Clear, honey-toned skin, graceful collarbones peeking out from the torn neck of his shirt. He wore a traveler's coat ripped at one seam, a black feather token stitched on the lapel in silken thread. His mouth was set for war, full plush lips pulled together in a scowl, as if this was all just one big inconvenience to him. Even muddy, he carried himself like he'd never learned how to bow. And gods, the scent, the cedar was warmer this near, smoky where it met skin. The citrus cut through it like a knife, clutched in a velvet glove, softly delivered but meant to wound. Jungkook hated that he noticed the warmth before the danger. Behind him, Yoongi kicked a fallen sword aside and squatted near one of the corpses. "Mercenary coin," he said, flipping the pouch open with a gloved hand. "Half stamped, half blank. Someone's paying to stay invisible. Or to make sure we see only what they want," Jungkook murmured over his shoulder as he knelt in the mud next to the prisoner. Rather than flinch, the man just looked bored. "Don't," Jimin said, his voice blunt. "If this is where you intend to be heroic, Jeon, save us both the speech. I know your pact better than that." Jungkook's head lifted slightly. "You know who I am. I know who everyone is," Jimin said, tone dry as old wine. "It's my job to." Jungkook ignored the pulse that jumped under his skin, catching the rope at Jimin's wrists and slitting it with a neat draw of his dagger. He didn't let the wrists go immediately. The hands were cold, bones elegant under his fingers. His pulse was steady, but that might have been out of sheer stubbornness. "You're bleeding," Jungkook said. "Not for you," Jimin bit out. His tone was proud, but his fingers twitched when Jungkook's thumb brushed the edge of an abrasion. The Jeon Alpha's gaze flicked to the rope burn, angry, raw, already bruising purple. He turned Jimin's wrists gently in his grip, the motion too careful to match his expression. For one breath, neither of them moved. Then Jungkook released him, the words sharp as a clean break. "You can stand." Behind them, the last mercenary crashed face first into the ferns with two Jeon men on his heels. The clearing fell quiet after the violence. Somewhere, a jay scolded from a high branch, shocked at all this human noise ruining its morning. Jimin rose without help, shaking the mud from his sleeves like he had somewhere better to be. The black feather at his lapel caught a drop of rain, shining briefly before it slid away. Jungkook's gaze followed the movement, slow and unwilling to look away. His attention was yanked back to reality when he heard Yoongi sheath his blade. "They're all dead," he reported, tone even. "No survivors." "Burn them," Jungkook said, still watching Jimin. "I don't want this stench drawing scavengers." A younger rider shifted, impatience in his voice. "You're keeping him, Commander? We should have taken his head while he was down." Another muttered agreement. The logic was simple. Remove the threat, remove the complication. Kill the Swan, and the Parks couldn't use the advantage he brought them. Kill him, and the Council would have a tidy corpse to parade. Proof of deterrence. It was the kind of tidy violence soldiers liked. It made decisions easy. Yoongi's hand went to the younger soldier's shoulder with the gentlest of clamps. "And what then? They'll say we murdered a Park Alpha on our soil. The Council doesn't want that. We don't want that." His eyes slid to Jungkook, steady as an anchor. "Whatever you decide here, there will be no turning back from. If you don't want war, Jungkook, get as far from this as you can." Jungkook felt the words like a tide pulling at him. Duty sat heavy across his shoulders, orders tucked into his belt, the Council's appetite for proof a constant drum. He thought of treaties, of paper that pretended to hold law but didn't. He thought of the men under him, of the thin, brittle piece that could crack if he let anger or revenge make his choices. But beneath policy, there was a smaller, more selfish thing, the idea of never seeing Jimin again. Letting him go would be tidy in the ledger of politics, but it would be final in a way Jungkook's blood did not like. Jungkook turned his head just enough for the soldier to see his expression. "You have a problem with that?" The man's throat bobbed. "No, sir." "Good." The riders fell back, some with relief, some with opinion left unsaid. Yoongi's jaw compressed into a line that could have been either worry or approval. Jungkook's men trusted obedience. They expected to follow orders. He had given one. It was careful, measured, not from a man afraid to act, but of a man deciding what he would be when he did. Yoongi's gaze slid between them, to the alpha who led him and the shape of the man they'd all heard about in fireside stories. "Why do I get the feeling you'll regret this one?" he said, low, not without an odd note of admiration tucked into it. He'd seen Jungkook make harder choices and live with them. "Probably," Jungkook replied, shrugging. It didn't matter now. The decision was made, and he couldn't change his mind without losing face. Besides, he didn't want to. He knew that for certain. He was drawn to this man like a moth to a flame, and it was likely to end about as well. "He goes with us," Jungkook said loudly. "He stays in my custody, my full responsibility." Jimin let out a short, humorless laugh. He didn't smile. Instead, his eyes flicked over the riders with thin, practiced interest, then back to Jungkook as if cataloging the man for future use. Rain beaded on his skin, and he flicked a damp curl from his forehead with an elegant impatience and looked up at Jungkook. "Custody? How quaint. Don't sound too excited about it. It's only until I get you back to the council for interrogation," Jungkook said, though the word tasted wrong in his mouth. He heard it echo as something official, a rationalization he knew they would need to offer the council as explanation for his decision. And yet even as he said it, a small part of him caught and flinched at how inadequate it sounded beside the throb of his own curiosity. "We have questions about mercenary traffic. You'll give answers if you want to keep breathing." Jimin's jaw tightened. For one breath, his composure frayed at the edge, a shadow passing like a cloud across the silver light of the moon. The line of his throat bobbed and then steadied. He met Jungkook's eyes with the sort of arrogant calm that had undone better men. "A lot of hassle, isn't it? You'll just get the same answer you expect there as you would here," he said, the words small and relentless. "Nothing." He said it like a promise and like a dare, like someone who'd rehearsed refusal until it fit him like supple leather armor, a defense, yet a flexible one. The riders around them listened to the exchange in silence. "Then you'll give me your silence somewhere cleaner than a killing field. If you think I'll just let you go, you're wrong." He jerked his chin. Yoongi tossed a length of clean cord. "Wrists." Jimin didn't hand them over immediately, so Jungkook took his hands instead, quick, dexterous, and without a show of force. The cedar in the air brightened against the steady burn of Jungkook's amber, a private spark only they could taste. "Stay within 3 paces, he said low, for Jimin alone. "Close enough I can see you breathe. Far enough you can't be picked off by some unseen attacker. You stay here, I keep you safe. You run, and I promise you won't like who finds you." Jungkook tied a reef knot with an extra coil, the inner loop wrapped around a thin strip of cloth so it would sit harsh to the eye but spare the skin. It looked punitive from where the riders watched, exactly the message he needed to send. "Now move." They took the deer track north in single file, rain heavier now, drumming through the high needles. The forest breathed around them, damp, intimate, and close enough that every exhale turned visible. Jungkook rode ahead, Jimin walking beside his stirrup with his bound wrists in front of him. The cord wasn't cruel, but it declared what it was. They were in Jeon territory, and he didn't let trophies walk free. The Jeon riders kept their distance. Not far, never far, but far enough to keep the scent collision happening between the two alphas from crowding them. Even through the rain, the air shimmered with the strange pressure that came when two alphas shared a space too small for pride. The men could smell it, taste it, a warning hum in the air that made their hackles rise. Politics might call them soldiers, but every one of them was still pack. And pack instinct recognized hierarchy faster than rank. The commander's scent, dark amber and stormy smoke, held them steady, told them they were safe, told them not to challenge. Yet underneath, the air trembled with a quieter battle, the effort of an alpha pretending he didn't feel the other at his flank, pretending he didn't want to look. Jimin noticed. Of course he did, and almost smiled. "You've improved since last season, Jeon," he said at last, voice calm as if discussing weather. "Your scouts used to need 3 days to catch up with rumors. This time, half that." Jungkook didn't answer. The rain was excuse enough to avoid talking. "So," Jimin said, voice measured and laced with quiet mockery, "this is just business, then? Capture the park air, wave the proof before the council. Trade me for something useful, land, metal, a clause rewritten in your favor." Efficient, his mouth curved, not quite a smile. Almost respectable, if it weren't so predictable. Jungkook's grip tightened on the reins until the leather creaked. "You call it predictable. I call it leverage. Security. You shouldn't have been this far from your lines." "Your lines," Jimin echoed, soft but edged. Strange word for something we swore to draw together after the last war. His gaze flicked sideways, sharp and knowing. "You remember that, don't you? You were there." The words landed like a dropped blade, quiet, deliberate, personal. Jungkook hadn't expected him to recall, let alone to have noticed. His scent almost betrayed his surprise, a brief flare of amber warmth before he forced it back down, smooth and neutral. "You say together, and yet your name keeps turning up where it shouldn't." "Rumors only," Jimin said, with a shrug. "You believe those now, do you?" "I believe what I can prove," Jungkook said. "And finding you in our forest, unescorted, outnumbered, collared by Cell's words. That's proof enough for the council you were doing something you shouldn't be." "Then congratulations," Jimin murmured. "You found your evidence. Make sure they spell my name right on the declaration of war." Jungkook looked down at him then, rain running off his jaw. "Don't flatter yourself. You're not the war. You're just the message that starts it. Already regretting keeping me then, Jeon?" Jimin taunted. Jungkook didn't take the bait. The rain filled the silence for them, washing the words away, but not the scent. Sharp cedar and bitter citrus cut through the wet pine like something alive, and try as he might to drive it out of his senses, his own sandalwood rose to meet it. It didn't matter that the treaty forbade dominance, scenting between alphas, but the forest was older than politics. It understood the language of storms. And this was how alphas thundered. Yoongi's horse clopped up beside them briefly. "We'll make camp in a mile. The men are uneasy." "Let them be," Jungkook said, relieved to have a distraction for a moment. With more mercenaries potentially behind any tree, uneasy keeps them breathing. When Yoongi fell back again, Jimin tilted his head slightly, the faintest smirk in his voice. "You really think parading me through Jeon territory is wise? Sooner or later someone will decide that treaty renegotiations matter less than their pride. They dare try and they will soon learn what happens when they disobey me. Protective, aren't you? How noble." Jimin's tone was soft but edged. "Almost makes a man wonder if it's the treaty you're worried about, or your prize." "I'm protecting the treaty," Jungkook replied. And that was the truth, or close enough to hide behind. "You'll live until the council decides what your life is worth. Land, trade, water rights, whatever they think they can bleed from the parks for your safe return." "It's just business then," Jimin said softly. "Nothing personal." Jungkook's eyes flicked down. Exactly. The lie hung between them like heat lightning. Visible, dangerous, and impossible to call anything else. Jungkook was starting to think life was so much simpler when Park Jimin was just a name. The track sloped toward a shallow ford, snowmelt water running cold and bright over the stones. The horses balked at the current's pull, ears flicking, so Jungkook signaled for the men to dismount. They led their mounts through the shallows one by one, boots sinking into the freezing rush. Jungkook led. Jimin waded after him, balance fine until one slick rock betrayed him. He stumbled, but Jungkook's hand was already there, catching his elbow before he could fall. For a heartbeat, they stayed like that, palm to arm, scent to scent, the air between them heavy with instincts that were well beyond pacts and politics. The cedarwood in Jimin's scent deepened, threaded with something new, a pulse of recognition that wasn't submission at all, just biology pretending to be language. Jungkook released him immediately. "Watch your footing." Jimin's chin lifted, arrogance to cover the moment. "Careful, John. Touching me so tenderly, you'll start rumors." "There already are rumors. They started when I didn't let the men kill you on sight," Jungkook said. His own tone was too dry, too honest to be believable. "Step wide. That rock's treacherous. Like you, like the world," Jungkook said, and moved ahead. As soon as they were through the ford, he mounted again, grateful for even the extra distance between him and his prisoner. By the time the tents came into view, the color of the clouds hanging over them had deepened from pewter to iron. The air carried that electric promise that made even the wolves uneasy the moment before lightning finds a place to strike. The camp beneath the storm clouds was built for endurance, not comfort. It wasn't meant to impress, it was meant to survive. A ring of low canvas tents, cook fires banked to coals, the faint metallic tang of weapons being cleaned and oiled for the following day. Traps glinted discreetly at the perimeter, for beasts, and for men too slow to recognize the difference. Every head turned when Jungkook rode in with his prize. "Is it him?" someone whispered. "The swan, it has to be. Look at the feather on his chest." "Thought he'd be taller," another muttered. "Thought you'd be smarter," Jimin said without bothering to turn his head. The ripple of laughter that broke around them wasn't the type that was kind. Jungkook didn't stop it. He let them look. Let them see what happens to those who cross Jeon borders without permission. A bound alpha from the park line, living proof dominance of their pack, was restored. But under the performance, he felt something sharper coiled in his chest. Victory should have tasted clean. Instead, it tasted like rain and cedar smoke and bitter citrus. Jungkook cut a direct line through the camp to the central ring, where his tent stood slightly taller than the rest. He pulled the flap aside and gestured for Jimin to enter. Inside, the air within smelled of oiled leather and sandalwood, faint warmth from the brazier rising like breath. Jimin scanned the space once. Maps weighted with stones on a small table. A private chest with a heavy brass lock. It wasn't a space that spoke of transience. Jungkook clearly spent a hefty amount of his time here in the middle of the forest, away from the council and the main body of the pack. "What's this then?" Jimin asked dryly. He looked around Jungkook's quarters, sharp eyes missing no detail. "The part where you ask tough questions and threaten to beat the answers out of me. This is the part where I decide how to keep you alive in a camp full of men already tempted to disobey me because of your reputation," Jungkook said. "Your sin alone is already making them restless." Jimin arched a brow. "Apologies. I didn't realize existing was a provocation here. It is when you're the fabled Black Swan." A faint smirk curved Jimin's mouth. "Allegedly. Has anyone ever proven he's anything more than a bedtime story to frighten green recruits?" "The figures haunting bedtime stories don't bleed," Jungkook said, gaze steady. "And not one was ever written to look like you." Something flickered behind Jimin's eyes. Amusement, maybe, or just the flattery of being seen. "Careful, Commander. Compliments from one alpha to another are almost a declaration. Which is why I'll choose my words carefully," Jungkook murmured. "Because you and I both know how this reads. 2 alphas, 1 tent, and too many witnesses outside waiting to see which of us loses control first." Jimin's mouth curved, a spark of challenge under the calm. "Then maybe you should untie me. Wouldn't want them thinking you're afraid of what I might do." Jungkook's jaw flexed. "That's exactly what I'm preventing." "This is how prisoners look," he said, gesturing at the rope binding Jimin's wrists. Jungkook's jaw flexed. "That's exactly what I'm preventing." "This is how prisoners look," he said, gesturing at the rope binding Jimin's wrists. "You know how rumors spread in camps like this. One hint of impropriety, and it's not your behavior that's questioned, it's mine." Jimin's gaze dropped deliberately to the ropes, then back to Jungkook's face. "So this isn't about power, it's about pride." "Power is pride," Jungkook said. "Without one, you don't keep the other." He moved closer, crouching to check the knot. It hadn't slipped, of course it hadn't, but his fingers brushed Jimin's pulse anyway, lingering a fraction too long. The rope was tight enough to convince his men, loose enough not to bruise. He told himself that balance was strategy, not mercy, but he was an awful liar, even to himself. Jimin held still, only his scent shifting, cedarwood deepening, dark as the coals in the brazier. "You time me, yet you touch me, Jeon," he whispered. "Even if you don't say a word, it's in your scent." Jungkook straightened his shoulders, pulling the air back into his lungs, heavy with rain and something unspoken. "I'll have water brought," Jungkook said, turning to look anywhere but at his prisoner. "And something hot." "I don't need your kindness," Jimin said, quiet but cutting. "Just decide whether you plan to question me or cage me." His eyes tracked the brazier's flicker as if warmth were a trick he refused to admit he wanted. Jungkook caught it immediately and crouched to add a coal, slow and deliberate, until the embers glowed more strongly. He added another log and watched the spark flare. The air between them seemed to hum, not from the impending storm, but from the effort it took to stay civil. Pride and instinct both straining at their leashes. "Eat. Rest. I'll give you until tomorrow to consider what answers you're going to give." Jimin smiled faintly, a cut glass curve. "Always so disciplined, Jeon. Discipline only holds until something stronger pulls." Jungkook didn't answer. He reached for the tent flap, pausing as thunder cracked close enough to shake the ridgepole. The light flared, washing Jimin in silver and shadow, all defiance and impossible grace. "I'll be back later. Try to sleep," Jungkook said, voice lower now, almost rough. "The storm's just getting started." Jimin's answer was barely above a whisper. "Isn't it always?" When Jungkook returned, the rain had gentled to a steady whisper against the canvas. Inside the tent, brazier had burned low, throwing a dull red glow across Jimin's sleeping form, still bound, but loose enough that the rope looked more like ritual than restraint. Jimin had drifted into sleep at last, his posture deceptively composed with his hands tucked under his cheek, as if he'd chosen the position himself and not due to the bounds that held him. His scent had changed too, softened by rest, cedar and citrus blending into something almost quiet. Jungkook stood in the doorway, far longer than he meant to, his wet hair dripping onto the rug, watching the rise and fall of that narrow chest. He told himself he was making sure the knots held. He told himself this was duty. But the truth was deeper than that. He'd brought an enemy into his tent, and now the entire air smelled of him. He loosened his cloak, sank to one knee by the brazier, fed at a single coal. The glow touched Jimin's face, lashes dark, mouth softened in sleep. And for one treacherous breath, Jungkook let himself wonder what he'd see if those eyes opened. What would those plush lips taste like? How would their scents tangle if distance, if pacts, if politics didn't matter? If instinct was allowed to win for once? The thought hit low in his chest, sharp as hunger. Cedar and citrus had already begun to thread through the canvas, twining with the low burn of his own sandalwood and amber until the air itself seemed to pulse between them. The mix was dizzying, intimate in a way no touch could match. It spoke of things forbidden by treaties and pact boundaries alike: claim, comfort, belonging. Jungkook drew a slow breath and forced his scent down, burying the surge beneath discipline. But even as he lay back, eyes on the tent roof, he knew it was already too late. The storm outside might pass, but this one had only just begun to build.
Thank you so much for listening. I know the world is a hard place right now, and I really hope this story brought a bit of comfort to your day. If you enjoyed the story, please remember to like and subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll be the first to know when a new story is released. You can find the written version of this and all my stories on my Patreon for free at patreon.com/cjmoon. I love you, I purple you, saranghae.